The flour cloud exploded across the kitchen like a small snowstorm when Sarah Henderson's elbow caught the edge of the ceramic bowl, and she knew right then that this day was going to test every ounce of patience she had left in her weary body. It was May of 1882 in McGill, Nevada, a mining town that had seen better days but still clung to life with the stubborn determination of a mule refusing to budge. Sarah had arrived 3 months earlier on the stagecoach from Sacramento, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and a heart full of determination to start fresh after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts and bitter memories. The small bakery she had managed to lease on the corner of Main Street and Cedar Avenue was her last chance at independence, at proving she could make something of herself without a husband or family name to prop her up. She surveyed the damage now, white powder coating every surface of her small kitchen, dusting the wooden counters, settling into the cracks between the floorboards, and decorating her dark blue dress like premature snow. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest, the kind of laugh that bordered on hysteria because if she did not laugh, she might just sit down and cry. "Well, Sarah," she said to the empty room, "at least the mice will eat well tonight." She set about cleaning up the mess, salvaging what flour she could because every cup was precious when her budget was stretched thinner than pie crust. The morning sun slanted through the single window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the golden light. Despite the setback, she had orders to fill. Mrs. Peterson wanted 2 loaves of bread by noon. The saloon needed their daily delivery of biscuits, and she had promised young Tommy Chen at the general store that she would bring by some of her cinnamon rolls as payment for the eggs he had given her on credit. By mid-morning, she had managed to get 3 batches of bread rising and was elbow-deep in dough for a batch of dinner rolls when she heard the bell above her shop door jingle. She had left it unlocked, a perhaps foolish habit in a mining town where desperation sometimes drove men to do terrible things, but she liked to think the best of people until they proved otherwise. "Be right with you," she called out, not looking up from her work. The dough beneath her hands was finally reaching the perfect consistency, smooth and elastic, and she could not stop now or risk ruining it. "Take your time, miss. I am in no hurry." The voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone from further south, maybe Texas or Oklahoma. Sarah glanced up briefly, catching an impression of a tall figure in the doorway, backlit by the bright Nevada sun so she could not make out his features. She returned her attention to the dough, kneading with practiced motions, folding and pressing, folding and pressing. "What can I help you with today?" she asked, pushing a strand of auburn hair back from her forehead with her wrist, trying not to get flour in it and likely failing spectacularly. "Well, I heard tell that the best bread in McGill comes from this little shop, and I figured I ought to test that claim for myself." Sarah felt a small flush of pride at the compliment, even as she reminded herself not to let flattery turn her head. "That is very kind, though I suspect Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house might dispute that claim. Mrs. Patterson makes bread that could double as ammunition in a pinch," the man said, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice. "I know because I have been staying at her establishment for the past week and have the evidence in my poor digestion to prove it." This time, Sarah did laugh, a genuine sound of amusement. She gave the dough a final fold and set it in a greased bowl to rise, covering it with a clean cloth. "I have heard similar complaints, though never phrased quite so diplomatically. Let me wash my hands and I can show you what I have available." She moved to the wash basin in the corner, scrubbing the sticky dough from her fingers with the harsh lye soap that left her hands perpetually raw. When she turned around, wiping her palms on her apron. She got her first proper look at her customer and felt her breath catch slightly in her throat. He was tall, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical work. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. He wore simple cowboy attire, dark trousers, a blue cotton shirt, scuffed boots, and a leather vest that had seen better days. But it was his face that caught her attention, strong-jawed and tanned from hours in the sun, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Those eyes were a startling blue-gray, the color of storm clouds, and they were currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "Sorry for my appearance," she said, gesturing at her flour-dusted dress and undoubtedly smudged face. "Baking is not a tidy profession." "Nothing to apologize for," he said, and there was something in his expression that was almost gentle. "Honest work never needs an apology. I am Blake Thornton, by the way. Recently arrived from Colorado, though Texas born and raised before that." "Sarah Henderson," she replied, moving behind the counter that separated the shop area from the back kitchen. "Welcome to McGill, Mr. Thornton. What brings you to our little corner of Nevada?" "Work, same as most folks. I have been hired on at the Patterson Ranch about 5 miles west of town. They needed someone with experience handling cattle and horses, and I needed a place to settle for a while." He stepped closer to the counter, examining the few loaves of day-old bread she had displayed there. "Been moving around too much these past few years. Time to put down some roots." Sarah nodded, understanding that sentiment all too well. "That sounds like a good plan. The Patterson Ranch is one of the more successful operations in this area. Mr. Patterson is a fair man from what I have heard. He seems decent enough. Offered me a fair wage and a cabin of my own on the property. Can't ask for much more than that." Blake picked up one of the loaves, testing its weight with experienced hands. "This one fresh, baked yesterday morning. I can offer you a better price on those since they are a day old, or if you want to wait about an hour, I have fresh loaves that will be ready soon. I will take this one for now, and maybe I will come back for one of those fresh ones later." He pulled a coin from his pocket, setting it on the counter. "Mind if I ask how long you have been running this shop?" 3 months, Sarah said, making change from her small cash box. "I am still building up my customer base, but it is coming along." 3 months, Blake repeated thoughtfully. "And you are running it all by yourself?" "I am." Sarah handed him his change, meeting his eyes with a directness that had occasionally unnerved men who expected women to be more demure. "Is that surprising? Impressive is the word I would use," Blake said, tucking the coins away. "Running a business alone is hard enough for anyone, but in a town like this, where I imagine there are not a lot of folks eager to see a woman succeed independently, it takes real grit." The unexpected understanding in his words caught Sarah off guard. Most men either dismissed her ambition or seemed threatened by it, but Blake spoke as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you. It has certainly been a challenge. I imagine so." Blake tucked the bread under his arm. "Well, I should let you get back to your work. But I suspect you will be seeing me again, Miss Henderson. I have a powerful weakness for good bread." "I will look forward to it, Mr. Thornton." She watched him leave, the bell jingling again as he stepped back out into the bright Nevada morning. For a moment, she stood there, one hand resting on the counter, thinking about storm cloud eyes and an unexpectedly gentle voice. Then she shook her head at her own foolishness and returned to her work. She did not have time for such distractions, not when she had a business to build and a life to establish. But Blake Thornton did return, just as he had predicted. He came back that afternoon for a fresh loaf, and then again 2 days later for biscuits, and then again at the end of the week for cinnamon rolls. Each time he lingered a bit longer, asking questions about her baking, about how she had learned her craft, about what had brought her to McGill. Sarah found herself looking forward to these visits, to the easy conversation that flowed between them, to the way he listened when she talked as though her words actually mattered. "My mother taught me," she told him one afternoon when he asked about her baking skills. She was rolling out pie crust, the marble rolling pin smooth and cool under her palms. She said that a woman who could bake well would never starve, and she was right about that. After she died when I was 15, I kept practicing, kept perfecting her recipes. It was a way to feel close to her, I suppose. "She would be proud of you," Blake said. He was sitting on the tall stool near the counter, a position he had claimed as his own over the past few visits. "Building something like this from nothing. I hope so." Sarah folded the crust carefully, laying it in the pie tin. "Though I am not sure she would have approved of me coming out here alone. She was more traditional in her thinking, believed a woman should have a husband before she struck out on her own. And you do not believe that?" Sarah paused, considering her words. "I believe a woman should have choices. If she wants to marry, that is wonderful, but if she wants to make her own way, she should have that option too. I got tired of waiting for my life to begin, tired of being told that I needed a man to validate my existence. So I decided to validate it myself." Blake was quiet for a moment, and when Sarah glanced up, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "That is a brave choice," he said finally. "Not everyone has the courage to go against what society expects." "Or the foolishness," Sarah said with a wry smile. "Some days I am not sure which one it is." "Courage," Blake said firmly. "Definitely courage." The weeks rolled by, marked by the rhythm of kneading and baking, of early mornings and flour-dusted evenings. Summer settled over McGill with a vengeance, turning the air thick and heavy, making the kitchen almost unbearable to work in. Sarah took to baking in the very early hours before dawn, when the air was marginally cooler, and finishing her work by mid-morning before the heat became truly oppressive. Blake's visits became a regular fixture in her days. He would stop by several times a week, sometimes for bread or pastries, sometimes just to talk. He told her about his work at the Patterson Ranch, about the herd of cattle they were raising, about the wild horses he was helping to break. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had been on his own since he was 16, that he had worked ranches and farms all across the West, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. "Why not?" she asked him one morning. She was kneading dough for her daily bread, her hands working the mass with practiced efficiency. "What keeps you moving?" Blake leaned against the counter, his hat in his hands, turning it absently. "Never felt like I fit anywhere, I guess. Always felt like there was something else waiting for me, something just over the next horizon, so I kept chasing it." "And did you ever find it?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "I am starting to think maybe I did." Sarah felt her cheeks warm, and she focused intently on her dough, kneading with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "That is good. McGill is not much, but it is a decent enough place to settle down." "It is not the place," Blake said quietly. "It is the people in it that make somewhere worth staying." The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken things, and Sarah found herself struggling for words. Before she could formulate a response, the bell above the door jangled and Mrs. Peterson swept in, full of complaints about her husband and demands for tomorrow's bread order. The moment passed, but Sarah felt its echo for the rest of the day, a pleasant flutter in her chest that she tried and failed to ignore. As summer deepened, Sarah found her business growing steadily. The miners who worked the claims in the surrounding hills started coming to her for their supplies, preferring her fresh bread to the stale offerings at the company store. The women in town began ordering special cakes for birthdays and celebrations. She was making enough not just to survive, but to begin saving a little to think about expanding, maybe hiring help. But with success came challenges. Not everyone was happy to see a single woman thriving. She heard the whispers, the speculation about how she was really earning her money, the suggestions that no woman could succeed without some man's help or some unsavory arrangement. She ignored it as best she could, held her head high, and let her work speak for itself. One evening in late July, she was closing up shop when three men stumbled out of the saloon across the street and made their way toward her. She recognized them as miners, rough men who spent their earnings as fast as they made them on whiskey and gambling. Her hand tightened on her keys as they approached, her instincts prickling with warning. "Well, well," the tallest one said, his words slurring slightly. "If it is not the pretty baker lady. Working late tonight, are you?" "Just closing up, gentlemen," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady and cool. "If you need bread, I open again at 6 in the morning." "We do not want bread," another one said, grinning in a way that made her skin crawl. "We want to know how come you are so successful. Pretty little thing like you, all alone, making more money than honest men working the mines. Makes a fellow curious." "Hard work and quality product," Sarah said, backing toward her door. "Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get home." The tall one stepped closer, blocking her path. "We heard different. We heard you have been entertaining men in that back kitchen of yours, offering more than just bread, if you catch my meaning." Anger flared hot in Sarah's chest, burning away the fear. "You heard wrong, and you would be wise to step aside before I report you to Sheriff Coleman." "The sheriff is not here," the third man said, speaking for the first time. "And we just want to be friendly like, maybe get a taste of what you have been selling." Sarah's hand closed around the keys in her pocket, the metal pressing into her palm. She was calculating her chances of getting inside and locking the door before they could follow when a voice cut through the evening air, cold and hard as iron. "The lady asked you to step aside." Blake emerged from the shadows near the general store, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and focused. He had been in town to pick up supplies, Sarah realized, his horse tied to the post nearby. Relief flooded through her so intensely it made her knees weak. "This is not your concern, Cowboy," the tall miner said, but his bravado had dimmed slightly. "When three men harass a woman on the street, it becomes every decent man's concern," Blake said, moving closer. He was not threatening, not overtly, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested he could handle himself in a fight. "Now, you fellows can walk away with your dignity intact, or we can involve the sheriff and you can explain to him why you thought it was acceptable to corner a lady in the street." The miners exchanged glances, weighing their options. Finally, the tall one spat on the ground and backed away. "This is not over." "Yes, it is," Blake said firmly. "And if I hear of any of you bothering Miss Henderson again, we will have a different kind of conversation, the kind that takes place outside of town where there are no witnesses." They left, muttering and casting dark looks over their shoulders, but they left. Sarah sagged against her door, the adrenaline draining from her body and leaving her shaky. Blake crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands hovering near her shoulders as though he wanted to touch her but was not sure if he should. "Are you all right?" His voice was gentle now, concerned. "Yes, I think so, thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been here." "Do not think about it. Are you steady enough to unlock that door, or should I do it?" Sarah fumbled with the keys, her hands trembling slightly, and Blake gently took them from her, unlocking the door and pushing it open. He guided her inside with a hand on her elbow, careful and respectful, then locked the door behind them. "Sit down," he said, steering her to the stool he usually occupied during his visits. "Take a minute to catch your breath." Sarah sat, pressing her palms against her thighs to stop their shaking. Blake moved around her small shop with surprising familiarity, finding her tin cup and pouring water from the pitcher she kept in the back. He handed it to her and she drank gratefully, the cool liquid helping to settle her nerves. "Thank you," she said again when she could trust her voice. "I have been on my own for a long time, and I have handled difficult men before, but 3 of them together, I was not sure I could manage." "You should not have to manage," Blake said, anger threading through his voice. "You should be able to close your shop and walk home without being harassed. What those men suggested about you, it was despicable." "It is not the first time I have heard such things," Sarah said tiredly. "Some people cannot accept that a woman might succeed on her own merit. There must be some other explanation, something scandalous or improper. Then those people are fools." Blake crouched down so he was at eye level with her, his expression fierce. "You have built something here through your own skill and determination, and anyone who cannot see that is not worth your consideration." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had been strong for so long, had endured the whispers and the judgments without letting them crack her armor, but something about Blake's unwavering faith in her broke through her defenses. "Sometimes I wonder if they are right, if I am being foolishly stubborn, if I should just give up and find some man to marry and let him take care of things." "Do you want that?" Blake asked. "Truly, no," Sarah admitted, "but it would be easier. Easier is not always better." Blake reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, solid and reassuring. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Sarah Henderson. Do not let small-minded fools make you doubt yourself." She looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was brushing gentle circles on her wrist, and felt something shift in her chest. This was more than friendship, more than simple attraction. This was something deeper, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Blake," she started, not sure what she wanted to say, but he shook his head. "You do not have to say anything, but I want you to know that I am here for whatever you need. Protection, friendship, or more if you ever want it. No pressure, no expectations, just the truth." The truth was she had been falling for him for weeks now, had been fighting it because she was afraid of losing her independence, of becoming what she had sworn she would never be. But looking at him now, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she realized that loving Blake Thornton would not make her less. It might just make her more. "Walk me home," she asked softly. "I would be honored." They walked through the quiet streets of McGill, their steps slow and measured. Blake kept his horse's reins in one hand and offered Sarah his other arm, which she took gratefully. She lived in a small room above the seamstress's shop, a modest space but clean and hers. When they reached the outside stairs that led to her door, she turned to face him. "Thank you again." "For everything." "No thanks needed." Blake hesitated, then said, "I meant what I said in there, about being here for you. I know you value your independence, and I respect that. But I also want you to know that accepting help, me, does not mean giving up who you are." "I am beginning to understand that," Sarah said. She rose on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, feeling the roughness of his evening stubble against her lips. "Good night, Blake." She hurried up the stairs before she could do something more foolish, like pulling him close and kissing him properly, like she had been wanting to do for weeks. At her door, she glanced back and found him still standing there, his hand pressed to the spot where she had kissed him, a smile playing at his lips. Sleep did not come easily that night. Sarah lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the evening, and thought about blue-gray eyes and gentle hands, and what it might mean to let someone in. She had been alone for so long, fighting so hard to prove she did not need anyone, that the thought of opening her heart was almost paralyzing. But Blake had been nothing but respectful, nothing but kind, and when she was honest with herself, she had to admit that she did not just want him around for protection or companionship. She wanted him, for the way he made her laugh, for the way he listened, for the way he saw her as a complete person rather than just a woman who needed managing. The next morning, she woke before dawn as usual and made her way to the bakery. The streets were empty, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east, and she relished the quiet. But when she reached her shop, she found Blake already there, sitting on the step outside her door, his hat pulled low over his eyes. "Blake, what are you doing here?" He straightened, pushing his hat back. "Wanted to make sure those men from last night did not try anything. Figured I would keep watch just in case." "You have been here all night?" Sarah asked, something warm and tender blooming in her chest. "Got a few hours of sleep," Blake said, standing and stretching. "Horse does not mind standing guard, and I have slept in worse places." Sarah shook her head, torn between exasperation and affection. "You should have gone back to the ranch, gotten proper rest." "Probably," Blake agreed. "But I would not have rested easy wondering if you were safe, so here I am." Sarah unlocked the door and held it open. "Well, since you are here, you might as well come in and let me make you breakfast. It is the least I can do." Blake followed her inside, and Sarah lit the lamps, casting warm yellow light across the small space. She stoked the fire in the oven, adding wood until it was burning hot, then began pulling out ingredients for biscuits and gravy, comfort food that would stick to his ribs and give him energy for the day ahead. They worked in comfortable silence, Sarah mixing and rolling while Blake watched, occasionally handing her things she needed before she could ask. The intimacy of it struck her, the easy domesticity of the moment, and she realized this was what it could be like, what life could be like if she was brave enough to reach for it. "Sarah," Blake said as she slid a pan of biscuits into the oven, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are you afraid of? And before you say you are not afraid of anything, I can see it in your eyes sometimes. This wariness, like you are waiting for the other shoe to drop." Sarah straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. It was a fair question, and he deserved an honest answer. "I had a beau once, back in Sacramento. James was his name. I thought he loved me, thought we would marry and build a life together. But what he really wanted was a housekeeper and a broodmare, someone to cook his meals and raise his children and never have a thought of her own. When I told him I wanted to open a bakery, wanted to have something of my own, he laughed at me, said I was being foolish and childish, that I would give up such silly notions once we were married." "But you did not marry him," Blake said. "No. I broke it off, and he told everyone in town that I was unstable, that I had delusions above my station. Made it impossible for me to get any kind of work except as a domestic, and even then people looked at me sideways. When my father died and I found out he had debts I could not pay, I sold everything and came here, where no one knew me and I could start fresh. And you are afraid that if you let yourself care for someone, you will lose everything you have built." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "I am afraid that love means surrender, means becoming less than who I am." Blake crossed to her, his boots loud on the wooden floor. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching. "Sarah, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing her own fear reflected there, but also understanding, also hope. "I do not want you to be less," Blake said. "I do not want you to give up your bakery or your independence or your dreams. I want to be part of those dreams if you will let me. I want to support you, to stand beside you, not in front of you. And if you decide you do not want that, if you decide you are better off alone, I will respect that too. But do not push me away because of what some fool in Sacramento made you believe about yourself and about love." What he offered was not love, it was control, and I am not him. Sarah felt tears spill over, running hot down her cheeks. "How do I know that? How do I know you will not change your mind once you have me, once I have given up my guard?" "You do not," Blake said honestly. "Just like I do not know that you will not break my heart. That is the risk we take when we care for someone. But I think you are worth that risk, Sarah. I think what we could have together is worth the fear." She reached up, her flowery hands cupping his face, and pulled him down to her. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other. Then Blake's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Sarah let herself sink into it, let herself feel everything she had been holding back. He tasted like morning and possibility, and she felt something in her chest crack open, something that had been locked tight for too long. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks." "Me too," Sarah admitted. "I was just too stubborn to admit it." "One of the many things I love about you," Blake said, then froze, his eyes going wide. "I mean, one of the things I really like. I did not mean to say love, not yet, even though I do, but I do not want to pressure you." Sarah laughed, the sound bright and free. "Blake Thornton, are you rambling?" "Apparently," he said sheepishly. "You make me nervous." "Good," Sarah said, kissing him again quickly. "You make me nervous too. I think that means it is real." The smell of baking biscuits filled the air, rich and yeasty, and Sarah reluctantly pulled away to check on them. They were perfect, golden brown on top, and she pulled them out, setting the hot pan on the counter to cool. Blake had moved to the stove, stirring the gravy she had started, and the sight of him there in her kitchen, helping with the cooking, made her heart squeeze. They ate breakfast together as the sun rose fully, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Blake told her about his plans for the day, about the wild Mustang that had been brought in that he was going to start working with. Sarah told him about her orders, about the wedding cake she had been commissioned to make for the school teacher's upcoming marriage. "Will you come by later?" Sarah asked as Blake prepared to leave, his belly full and his eyes warm. "Could not keep me away," he promised. He kissed her again, slow and sweet, and Sarah felt herself melting into it. Over the following weeks they settled into a rhythm. Blake came by every morning before heading to the ranch, and Sarah would have coffee ready and fresh biscuits. He returned in the evenings and they would take walks together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about the parents he had lost to fever when he was young, about the years of drifting and searching. She told him about her mother's death, about her father's slow decline into bitterness and debt, about her dreams of building something that would last. The town noticed, of course. People always noticed. The gossip shifted from scandalous speculation to romantic interest. And while there were still those who disapproved of Sarah's independence, there were more who seemed charmed by the idea of the hard-working baker and the honest cowboy finding each other. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the boarding house and was the biggest gossip in town, cornered Sarah at the general store one afternoon. "So, you and that Thornton boy are courting, are you?" "We are spending time together," Sarah said carefully, not wanting to fuel the rumor mill more than necessary. "He is a good man," Mrs. Peterson said, surprisingly serious. "My husband speaks highly of him, Says he is the best hand with horses he has seen in years and honest as the day is long. You could do worse." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said, meaning it. "Of course, you could also do better," the older woman added with a sniff. "A man with more property, more prospects. You are a pretty girl with a good business. You have options." "Blake is my option," Sarah said firmly, "and he is more than enough." Mrs. Peterson harumphed, but did not argue further, and Sarah counted it as a victory. One evening in late August, Blake arrived at the bakery with a package wrapped in brown paper. Sarah was just finishing up her cleaning, putting away the last of the day's unsold goods for tomorrow, when he came in looking nervous and excited in equal measure. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing the package. "A gift," Blake said. "I saw it at the general store and thought of you." Sarah untied the string carefully, folding back the paper to reveal a beautiful set of embroidered dish towels, delicate flowers stitched along their borders in colorful thread. They were practical but lovely, exactly the kind of thing she would use but would never have bought for herself. "Blake, they are beautiful, but you should not have spent your money on me." "I wanted to," he said. "You work so hard, Sarah. You deserve nice things. And besides, I am courting you. I am supposed to bring you gifts." "Are you?" Sarah asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Courting me officially?" "I thought that was obvious," Blake said, moving closer. "But if you need me to make a formal declaration, I will. Sarah Henderson, I am courting you with the intention of making you my wife if you will have me." There. Official enough. Sarah's heart was racing, her palms suddenly damp. "That is very official. And what if I say yes to the courting, but I am not ready to talk about marriage yet?" "Then we keep courting until you are ready," Blake said simply. "I am not going anywhere, Sarah. I am not James from Sacramento. I am here for the long haul, whatever that looks like." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her lips to his, pouring all her gratitude and affection and growing love into it. Blake responded enthusiastically, his arms wrapping around her waist and lifting her slightly off her feet. When they broke apart, both flushed and breathing hard, Sarah said, "Yes, to the official courting, and we will see about the rest." "That is all I am asking for," Blake said. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints that summer was ending. The mining operations around McGill were slowing down as some of the smaller claims played out, and there was talk that the town might not survive another few years. Sarah tried not to worry about it, tried to focus on building her business day by day, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. "What will you do if the town folds?" Blake asked one evening. They were sitting on the step outside her bakery, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I do not know," Sarah admitted. "Move to another town, I suppose, start over again." "You could come to the ranch," Blake said. "There is always work for someone who can cook and bake. The hands would probably build you a shrine if you started making them fresh bread every day." Sarah laughed. "Somehow I do not think Mrs. Patterson would appreciate me encroaching on her territory." "Mrs. Patterson can barely boil water without burning it. Trust me, you would be doing everyone a favor." Blake was quiet for a moment, then said, "Or we could go somewhere else entirely. California, maybe, or up to Oregon. I hear there are opportunities up north for folks willing to work hard." "We?" Sarah asked softly. "We," Blake confirmed. "If you want, I meant what I said, Sarah. I am not going anywhere without you. Wherever you go, that is where I want to be." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and tried to imagine a future that included this man beside her. It was getting easier every day. "I want that too, but I am still scared." "So am I," Blake admitted. "Terrified, actually. I have never felt this way about anyone before, never wanted to stay anywhere badly enough to put down real roots. But with you, I want it all. The house, the life, the future, and that is scary as hell. But you are still here. But I am still here, Blake agreed. He turned slightly, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. And I am going to keep being here for as long as you will let me. They kissed as the sun set, as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple, and Sarah let herself believe, finally, that maybe happily ever after was not just a fairy tale. Maybe it was real, and maybe she was brave enough to reach for it. October brought the first frost, and with it, a new challenge. One of the ranchers on the outskirts of town, a man named Silas Morrison, started spreading rumors that Blake was stealing horses from local properties and selling them in other towns. It was completely fabricated, born from Silas's jealousy over Blake's success with the Patterson horses, and his anger that Sarah had refused his own crude advances months earlier. But rumors did not need truth to be damaging. Blake was furious when he heard, ready to confront Silas directly, but Sarah convinced him to go through proper channels. They approached Sheriff Coleman together, presenting evidence of Blake's whereabouts on the days the alleged thefts had occurred, witness statements from Mr. Patterson and others who could vouch for his character. The sheriff, a grizzled man in his 50s who had seen every kind of troublemaker the West had to offer, listened patiently and then nodded. I figured it was hogwash. Silas has been making noise for weeks, but he cannot produce any actual evidence. I will have a talk with him, make it clear that spreading false accusations can land a man in legal trouble. The matter was resolved, but it left Blake shaken. That evening he came to the bakery looking exhausted, the weight of the false accusation heavy on his shoulders. Sarah locked the door early and pulled him into the back kitchen, sitting him down and making him tea. "I hate this," Blake said, his hands wrapped around the warm cup. "I have spent my whole life trying to be honest, trying to do right by people, and some bastard can almost destroy my reputation with lies." "But he did not," Sarah said firmly. "Because people know you, Blake. They know your character. Silas is a known troublemaker and his word carries no weight." "You are all right. This time," Blake said. "But what about next time? What about when we have a family, when there are children who could be hurt by false accusations? How do I protect them from that?" "The same way we protected you from it," Sarah said. "With truth and community and people who care about us. You cannot control what other people say or do, Blake. You can only control yourself and trust that goodness will prevail." Blake looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "You said we, when we have a family." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I did not I? Does that mean what I hope it means?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment, knowing she had to be brave. "It means I love you, Blake Thornton. It means I want a future with you, wherever that takes us. It means I am done being afraid of what love might cost me, because I know now what it gives me instead. It gives me you." Blake set his cup down with enough force that tea sloshed over the rim, but he did not seem to notice. He pulled Sarah into his lap, kissing her with a fervor that stole her breath, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on tight. "I love you," Blake said against her lips. "God, Sarah, I love you so much. I have been waiting to hear you say it, hoping you felt the same way." "I do," Sarah said. "I love you, I want to marry you, I want to build a life with you, all of it." Blake pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "You mean that? You are ready?" "I am ready," Sarah confirmed. "I do not know what the future holds or where we will end up, but I know I want you there beside me." Blake stood, setting her gently on her feet, and then to her surprise, he dropped to one knee. He did not have a ring, but he took her flowery hand in his and looked up at her with such love and devotion that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Sarah Henderson, I do not have much to offer you. No family estate, no fortune, Just a modest wage and a strong back and a heart that is completely yours. But if you will have me, I promise to spend every day of my life trying to make you happy. I promise to support your dreams, to stand beside you in every challenge, to love you with everything I have. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sarah said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, Blake, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the small kitchen while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools, and Sarah realized she had never felt so completely happy in her entire life. They married 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning when the sky was so blue, it almost hurt to look at. The ceremony took place in the small church at the end of Main Street, with most of the town in attendance. Sarah wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a small bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Blake had ridden out to collect at dawn. Mr. Patterson stood up as Blake's best man, and the schoolteacher, Miss Emily Wright, served as Sarah's maid of honor. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her with such tenderness that Sarah felt her heart might burst. The reception was held in the bakery, which Sarah had closed for the day. She had spent the previous week preparing food, and the community had contributed dishes as well, resulting in a feast that filled every available surface. There was music and dancing, and Sarah had never felt so surrounded by goodwill and affection. As the evening drew to a close and the last guests filtered out into the night, Blake pulled Sarah close, swaying with her to music that existed only in their hearts. "Mrs. Thornton," he murmured against her hair. "How does that sound?" "Strange," Sarah admitted, "but wonderful. I think I will keep Henderson for business purposes, though. I have built a reputation and I do not want to lose it." "Keep whatever name you want," Blake said, "as long as you keep me too." "That is a promise I can easily make," Sarah said. They had decided to live in Sarah's room above the seamstress's shop temporarily while they saved money to build a small house on the Patterson property. Mr. Patterson had offered them 2 acres on the far side of the ranch, good land with access to water, and Blake was already drawing up plans for a modest home with space for Sarah to continue her baking. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and make decisions together, navigating the small conflicts that arose from 2 independent people learning to be a unit. But through it all, their love remained steady, growing deeper with each passing day. Sarah continued running her bakery, and Blake continued his work with the horses. They fell into a comfortable routine, waking early to have breakfast together before Blake rode out to the ranch, reuniting in the evenings to share dinner and conversation. They talked about their dreams, about the house they would build, about the family they hoped to have one day. In January, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Blake one morning as he was preparing to leave for work, unable to keep the secret any longer. He had frozen, his hand on the door handle, and then turned slowly to face her. "Say that again," he said, his voice careful as though he was afraid he had misheard. "I am pregnant," Sarah repeated, her hands unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Blake crossed to her in 2 long strides and lifted her into his arms, spinning her carefully before setting her down and dropping to his knees in front of her. He pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapped around her waist, and Sarah felt his shoulders shake. "Blake, are you all right?" She ran her fingers through his hair, concerned. "I am perfect," he said, his voice muffled against her dress. "I am so happy, Sarah. I never thought I would have this, a family of my own. Thank you." "I am pretty sure it took both of us," Sarah said, laughing through her own tears. But you are welcome. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though the morning sickness in the early months made baking a challenge. Sarah stubbornly continued working, refusing to let the baby slow her down, but she did eventually hire a young woman named Clara to help with the heavier tasks as her belly grew. They broke ground on their house in March, and watching it take shape was a joy unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Blake did much of the work himself, with help from some of the ranch hands, and by the time summer arrived, they had a snug little two-room cabin with space for expansion. It was not grand, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and paid for with their own money. They moved in during the last week of June, and Sarah spent a blissful few days arranging their modest furniture and hanging curtains and making it into a home. Blake had built her a large work table for baking, positioning it near the window so she could look out at the mountains while she worked. "You thought of everything," Sarah said, running her hand over the smooth wood. "I want you to be happy here," Blake said. "I want this to be a place where you can have everything you need." "I have everything I need," Sarah said, taking his hand and placing it on her swollen belly. "Right here." Their son was born on a hot August afternoon, arriving into the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being disturbed. They named him Benjamin Thomas Thornton, and Blake wept openly when the midwife placed the tiny, red-faced infant in his arms. "He is perfect," Blake whispered, staring down at his son with wonder. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." Sarah, exhausted but euphoric, watched her husband fall in love with their child and felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. This was what she had been looking for without knowing it, not just independence or success, but connection, family, love. The months after Benjamin's birth were chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Sarah learned to balance motherhood with her baking business, bringing Benjamin to the bakery in a basket when he was tiny, having Clara watch him as he grew more mobile. Blake was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, teaching him about horses and cattle and the land they called home. McGill continued to decline as the mines played out, and by the time Benjamin was 2 years old, it was clear the town would not last much longer. Many families had already moved on, seeking opportunities elsewhere, and Sarah's bakery business had declined along with the population. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their little cabin watching Benjamin chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Blake brought up what they had both been thinking. "It is time, is not it? Time to move on." Sarah nodded slowly. "I think so. There is nothing left here for us, not really. My bakery is barely making enough to cover expenses, and Mr. Patterson is talking about selling the ranch." "Where should we go?" Blake asked. They had been researching options for months, reading newspapers from other territories, asking travelers about conditions elsewhere. Oregon kept coming up, the Willamette Valley specifically, where the soil was rich and the opportunities plentiful. "Oregon," Sarah said. "Let us go to Oregon." They left McGill in the spring of 1886, their belongings packed into a sturdy wagon that Blake had purchased and outfitted for the long journey. Benjamin, now 3.5, was thrilled by the adventure, chattering excitedly about the horses and the wagon and the big journey they were going on. The trip took nearly 3 months, following established wagon routes but still facing numerous challenges. There were river crossings that tested Blake's skill as a driver, steep mountain passes that left them all exhausted, days of endless prairie that seemed to stretch on forever. Through it all, Sarah baked when they could stop long enough, trading bread and biscuits to other travelers for supplies and news. They reached the Willamette Valley in late June, and Sarah fell in love with it immediately. The valley was green and lush, so different from the harsh Nevada landscape they had left behind. Rivers and streams crisscrossed the fertile soil, and the air smelled of growing things and possibility. They settled near a small town called Harrisburg, purchasing 20 acres of good farmland with the money they had saved over the years. Blake began building them a proper house, larger than their Nevada cabin, with a separate building for Sarah's baking. Word of her skills spread quickly, and soon she had more business than she could handle, supplying bread to the general store, taking special orders for occasions, even teaching baking classes to local women who wanted to learn her techniques. Blake established himself as well, breeding and training horses, developing a reputation for producing quality animals. The ranch hands and farmers in the area sought him out specifically, willing to pay premium prices for his expertise. Life was good, better than either of them had dared to hope. In the fall of 1887, Sarah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Charlotte Marie. Blake had hoped for a girl, had even admitted to Sarah during her pregnancy that he wanted a little version of her to spoil and adore. Charlotte had Sarah's auburn hair and Blake's blue-gray eyes, and she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Benjamin was a wonderful big brother, protective and gentle with his baby sister. Sarah would often find him sitting beside her cradle, telling her elaborate stories about cowboys and horses and adventures, even though Charlotte was far too young to understand. The years passed in a blur of work and family and love. They added on to the house as their family grew, welcoming another son, William, in 1890, and another daughter, Eleanor, in 1893. Their farm prospered, and Sarah's bakery became a community institution, a place where people gathered not just for bread but for conversation and connection. Blake and Sarah grew older together, their love deepening and maturing with the passing years. They still took walks together in the evenings when they could, still talked about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection that had first brought them together. One evening in the summer of 1898, they were sitting on the porch swing Blake had built, watching the sun set over their fields. Their children were all inside, the older ones helping with dinner preparations, the younger ones playing before bedtime. Sarah was kneading dough for tomorrow's bread in a large bowl on her lap, her hands working the familiar rhythm without conscious thought. "You know what I realized today?" Blake said, his arm draped around her shoulders. "What is that?" Sarah asked, not looking up from her work. "It has been 16 years since I walked into your bakery in McGill and you had flour all over your face. 16 years since you looked up at me with those beautiful eyes and completely changed my life." Sarah smiled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand and undoubtedly leaving a streak of flour there, an old habit she had never broken. "Has it really been that long? Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever." "Both," Blake said. "It is both." He reached over and gently wiped the flour from her nose, just as he had done countless times over the years. But this time, instead of just cleaning it away, he leaned in and kissed the spot, soft and tender. "What was that for?" Sarah asked, her hands stilling in the dough. "Just remembering the first time I wanted to do that," Blake said. "That first day in your bakery, you had flour on your nose and all I could think about was how much I wanted to kiss it off. But I did not, because we had just met and you would have thought I was insane." "I might have," Sarah agreed, laughing, "but I also might have let you. I was drawn to you from the start, even though I fought it." "I am glad you stopped fighting," Blake said. He took the bowl from her hands, setting it aside, and pulled her close. "I am glad you took a chance on a wandering cowboy with nothing to offer but his heart." "You offered me everything," Sarah said, resting her head on his shoulder. "You offered me partnership and respect and love without conditions. You offered me a life beyond what I ever imagined possible." "We built it together," Blake said. "Everything we have, everything we are, we did it together." From inside the house, they heard Benjamin call out that dinner was ready, followed by the thunder of small feet and Charlotte's voice raised in some dispute with William. Normal, beautiful, chaotic family life. "We should go in," Sarah said, but she did not move, content to stay there in the circle of Blake's arms for just a moment longer. "In a minute," Blake agreed. "Let me just hold you for a minute." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky, as the stars began to emerge overhead, as the sounds of their family drifted out from the house behind them. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and partnership and mutual respect, who had created something beautiful and lasting in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Benjamin grew into a fine young man, eventually marrying a schoolteacher named Rachel and taking over the horse breeding business from Blake. Charlotte became a teacher herself, passionate about education and equality. William studied agriculture and helped expand their farm, implementing new techniques that increased their yield. Eleanor, the baby, showed an early talent for baking and spent hours in Sarah's kitchen, learning all her mother's secrets and recipes. Blake and Sarah grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with the evidence of years of laughter and occasional tears. Blake's hands, once so strong and sure, developed arthritis that made certain tasks difficult, but he adapted, finding new ways to work with the horses he loved. Sarah's eyesight dimmed slightly, making the fine detail work of decorating cakes more challenging, but she too adapted, focusing on the bread and pastries that had always been her specialty. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1914, their children threw them a surprise party, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. The celebration was held in the large barn Blake and Benjamin had built years earlier, decorated with flowers and lanterns, filled with music and laughter and love. As Blake led Sarah onto the makeshift dance floor for their anniversary waltz, she looked up at him and saw not the gray-haired man of 63, but the young cowboy who had walked into her bakery all those years ago with storm-cloud eyes and a gentle smile. "What are you thinking?" Blake asked, guiding her expertly through the steps. "That I would do it all again," Sarah said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you again and again and again." "Good," Blake said, pulling her closer. "Because you are stuck with me, Sarah Thornton." "For better or worse, remember? For better," Sarah said firmly. "It has always been for better." The years that followed were gentler, slower. Blake officially retired, turning the business fully over to Benjamin but still spending his days among the horses, unable to fully give up the work that had defined so much of his life. Sarah gradually reduced her baking, eventually closing the commercial side of her operation, but still making bread for her family and special orders for close friends. They became grandparents multiple times over, welcoming grandchildren who filled their home with energy and noise and unconditional love. Blake taught each of them to ride, just as he had taught their parents. Sarah taught them to bake, passing on not just recipes but the wisdom of patience and practice and pride in work well done. In the spring of 1920, Blake fell ill with pneumonia. Sarah nursed him through the fever and chills, sitting by his bedside day and night, reading to him from his favorite books, telling him stories of their life together, refusing to let him slip away without a fight. He recovered, but slowly, and the illness left him weakened. Still, he maintained his humor and his optimism, joking that he was too stubborn to die and leave Sarah to deal with their children's antics alone. "Someone has to keep you in line," he said one afternoon as they sat together in the garden Sarah had cultivated over the years, surrounded by flowers and the buzzing of bees. "I think at this point, our children are keeping us both in line," Sarah said, squeezing his hand gently. His skin was papery thin now, spotted with age, but his grip was still warm and familiar. "True enough," Blake agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sarah, I want you to know something." "What is that?" "That day I walked into your bakery, that was the day my life truly began. Everything before that was just marking time, waiting for you. These years with you, they have been the greatest gift I could have imagined." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, a common occurrence these days when her emotions sat so close to the surface. "Blake Thornton, are you getting sentimental in your old age?" "Maybe I am," he said. "But I mean every word. I love you, Sarah. I have loved you since the moment you looked up at me with flour on your nose and fire in your eyes. I will love you until the day I die and beyond if there is anything beyond this life." "I love you too," Sarah whispered. "More than words can express. You gave me everything I did not know I needed." Blake brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "We gave it to each other." They lived several more years together, each day a gift they did not take for granted. Blake passed away peacefully in his sleep in the fall of 1925, at the age of 74. Sarah held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love and promises to follow him when her own time came. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, keeping herself busy with her garden and her baking and the life they had built together. She spoke of Blake constantly, keeping his memory alive for the younger grandchildren who had never known him, telling stories of the cowboy who had swept her off her feet in a dusty Nevada mining town so many years ago. On a warm June morning in 1928, Sarah Henderson Thornton died in her sleep at the age of 74. She was found in her bed, a peaceful expression on her face, her hand stretched out across the empty space where Blake had once slept as though reaching for him even in death. Her children buried her beside Blake on a gentle hillside overlooking the farm they had built together, under the shade of an oak tree they had planted in their first year in Oregon. The funeral was well attended, a testament to the lives they had lived and the love they had shared, not just with each other but with their community. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the successful businesses they had established, in the countless lives they had touched with their kindness and integrity. But more than that, it lived on in the story of two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, partnership over isolation, who had built something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after they were gone. Years later, their great-granddaughter would find an old journal of Sarah's, tucked away in a trunk of keepsakes. In it, Sarah had written about meeting Blake, about their courtship and marriage, about building their life together. The last entry was dated the day before she died, and it reads simply, "I am grateful for every moment, every choice, every challenge that led me to him. Love is worth every risk, every fear, every leap of faith. I only hope our children and their children remember that, and have the courage to reach for it when it presents itself, flower on the nose and all." The journal became a family treasure, passed down through generations, a reminder of the love story that had started it all, of the woman who had been brave enough to choose independence and the man who had been wise enough to love her for it, of a life built on mutual respect and partnership and enduring affection. In the small town where they had lived and died, there was eventually a plaque placed in the town square, commemorating Sarah's bakery and Blake's horse ranch, honoring their contributions to the community. But the real monument to their love was not in brass or stone. It was in the family they had created, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set of what love could be when given freely and accepted without conditions. Their story became local legend, told and retold, embellished and romanticized, but always returning to the essential truth at its core. That love, real love, the kind that lasts and endures and transforms, is built not on grand gestures but on daily choices, on respect and partnership and the willingness to stand together against whatever challenges the world presents. And it all started on a spring morning in a dusty Nevada mining town, when a cowboy walked into a bakery and saw a woman with flour on her nose and knew, in that instant, that his wandering days were over. She had been kneading dough, focused on her work, building her dreams one loaf at a time. He had been searching for home, never quite fitting anywhere he landed. Together, they found what they had both been seeking: a place to belong, a person to belong with, a future worth building. The flour had dusted her nose that first day, a small imperfection in an otherwise determined presentation, and Blake had wanted to kiss it away even then. When he finally did, years later on their porch in Oregon, it was not just a gesture of affection but a promise kept, a reminder that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth working for, worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. Their children often wondered what it must have been like, that first meeting, that first moment when their parents' eyes met across a small town bakery. They imagined the spark, the connection, the immediate recognition that this person, this stranger, was somehow essential. And while Sarah and Blake never claimed it was love at first sight, they both agreed it was recognition at first sight, a sense that they had found someone who saw them truly, who understood them completely, who would walk beside them through whatever came next. That recognition, that seeing and being seen, was the foundation of everything they built. It sustained them through lean years and prosperous ones, through the loss of parents and the birth of children, through illness and health, through every ordinary day and extraordinary challenge. It was there in the way Blake always saved the last biscuit for Sarah, in the way Sarah always had coffee ready when Blake came in from the cold, in the thousand small kindnesses and considerations that marked a life shared. When their grandchildren asked for the secret to a happy marriage, Blake and Sarah gave different answers that somehow said the same thing. Blake would say, "Marry someone you respect as much as you love, someone you want to talk to when the romance fades and all you have left is daily life." Sarah would say, "Marry someone who sees you as a complete person, not as a solution to their problems or a decoration for their life, but as a partner in building something bigger than either of you alone." Both answers reflected the truth of what they had built, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made new each day. They chose each other in the easy moments and the hard ones, when they agreed and when they argued, when life was good and when it was heartbreaking. That consistent choosing, that daily recommitment, was what transformed initial attraction into enduring love. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and parting. But it was not a sad ending, not really. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. They had found what so many search for and never find: a true partner, a genuine home, a love that transformed them both into better, fuller versions of themselves. And it all began with flour on a nose, a gentle hand wiping it away, and a kiss that promised everything.